Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Enrique Levin, co-founder and VP of Product at Zintro. Zintro is a global platform that makes it easy for companies to start a conversation with highly specialized experts, consultants, contractors, and job candidates about potential phone consults, projects, and even employment opportunities. Specialization spans all industry sectors, disciplines, job functions, and geographies. Today's webinar, Managing Your Focus, Time Management and Prioritization for Independent Professionals, will be presented by Katy Tynan, partner at MindBridge Partners. Katy is the author of Practical Guides to Career Transitions, as well as a speaker and consultant in How Work is Evolving. She advises organizations on how to leverage the free agent workforce and integrate independent professionals with internal teams. Katy is an expert in how the employer-employee
on not trying to do more, but rather trying to do the right things and figuring out what those right things are and talking about some tools and resources to stay on track with those things. So you don't have a time machine, I don't have a time machine, and we all have this juggling act that we try to do when we're managing our own business. And in fact, we have this juggling act even if we're not managing our own business. So in the middle here, I have service delivery, because at the end of the day, selling our expertise, doing the actual work that produces the revenue that we're looking to generate is at the core. But all around that are these other tasks, and we've talked about some of them in other webinars, so networking and marketing and creating proposals and managing finances and staying current on our topic of choice so that we can continue to call ourselves experts and not feel like we're out of date. All of these things need to fit into our days and need to fit into our schedules. And each of them takes its own time. And I want to talk a little bit about the act of creative work, which a lot of what working for yourself is, that it's not assembly line work. You cannot simply give yourself a list of tasks and then plow through them. A lot of the work that you do, whether it's your service delivery or whether it's the marketing work or whether it's networking, a lot of that work is creative work. And creative work requires that you have time and brain space to think and to explore. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about here in this juggling act is how to manage when you're trying to do deep work, how to get down into that deep work and to give yourself time and space to be able to do it, not just plow through it, but do it effectively, do it thoughtfully. So when we think about some of these time management strategies, I want you always to have in the back of your mind that it's easy to make a list and it's easy to plow through a bunch of tasks, but it becomes harder to do thoughtful work and creative work in that same way. So some of the strategies that we're going to talk about later are ways to do that kind of creative work without getting overwhelmed and without feeling like the work itself is being sacrificed to trying to fit it into your life. So how does time management help? Why are we talking about time management in the first place? Why don't we just go out and do work? Why do we need any kind of a strategy? Well, really, time management helps in 3 different ways. It helps you as you step back and think about how you want to manage your time. It helps you set goals and see where are you today, where do you want to be in the future, and then how are you going to get there. So one big part and aspect of time management is goal planning and values and understanding what your longer term strategies are, both professionally and personally, and then how you're moving towards those goals. Time management also helps you organize your tasks, and that is an important part of what we're going to talk about. There are plenty of tools out there that are designed to help you manage tasks, whether it's project management, whether it's task management, whether it's to-do lists. There are lots of ways that you can organize and manage your tasks. But the third piece, which I think is something that many people forget, is that time management also helps you integrate things like time to rest and recharge, time to reacquaint yourself with your creativity and your inspiration and why you do this work, and it helps you create some space for continuous learning. And all of those things, I use the word health, it adds up to your mental health, which allows you to continue to do this work. So a good time management system will help in all 3 of these areas. It will help you at the goals and values level because it will require you to think about those things. It will help you manage those daily tasks so they don't fall off the map. And it will integrate your ability to rest, to recharge, to learn, and to do the things that ultimately make you a better consultant, a better expert, and allow you to continue to pursue your career without feeling stressed and burned out and like you never want to do this work again. So all time management systems have certain things in common. And I want to talk about them generally first before we get into a couple of the specific ones that you may have heard of. And so at a starting point, time management systems have these things in common. First of all, values and larger goals, your governing values, are at the top of every system. there's only one reason to try and manage your time, and that's because you're trying to accomplish something. So if you don't have anywhere to go, and it's, the old cliched saying, if you don't know where you want to end up, it doesn't really matter what road you take. So values and larger long-term goal planning is part of setting the chart and saying, where do I want to be? What's important to me as a person? What's important to me as a professional? What's important to me in terms of structuring my life? And then out of those things rolls down personal goals and professional goals. And then you can roll down further into projects and into tasks in order to accomplish those governing values. But almost any time management system that you look at is going to start at a high level with the idea of values and with the idea of understanding where it is that you're trying to get to in the first place. So then when we think about what those systems have in common in terms of structure, there's always an element of priority setting, and there's often an element of scheduling, and then an element of action items. So when you set, and I'm just going to go back to the previous slide for a second, when you understand your values, when you understand the larger picture of where you're trying to go and what your professional and personal goals are, then you can go through the exercise of setting priorities and of creating a schedule and of creating action items. The place that I see people stumble in many cases when they're trying to think about time management and when they're trying to think about organizing their lives is that they start here with priorities and schedules and action items, and they start to say, what should I be doing, what should I be doing, and not where should I be going and how do I want to get there in the first place. So when you look at systems, and we'll talk a little bit later about getting those systems to work for you and what sort of a system will work specifically for you, you'll find when you go and look at tools, whether they're software tools or whether they're processes and procedures, that they have these three elements included in them in a very common way. And then it just becomes a question of, how do you like to work? How do you like to manage your priorities? How do you like to use your calendar? What kinds of lists are helpful to you? Do you want to have them on your smartphone? Do you want to have them on paper? Do you want to have them in your head? I don't recommend having them in your head. But you'll see that these are really what everything about time management comes down to. And again, I'm going to roll all the way back to the time machine conversation, which is we still can't make more time. So while we can set our priorities, while we can look at our calendar, and while we can create action items, we still have to remember that it's not going to be possible to fit in absolutely everything that we want to do. And that's why prioritization is important. We also have to remember, and there's been a lot of talk about this topic lately, that we really don't multitask well. Multitasking is not something that the human brain is particularly good at. So when we talk about schedules, I'm going to encourage you a little bit later to think about blocking off time for specific tasks that you want to do. And then you can really start to see, wow, I can only fit so many things into one day. And then you can start to think about what you can realistically commit to or not commit to. And then finally, on the action item side, when you've decided what your priorities are, when you've decided how many things you can fit in your schedule, then you can start to think about, okay, what am I going to put on my list? And oh, I guess I need to have a list, and I need to have a way of tracking these action items, and specifically tracking items as they come on and off the list, which happens frequently. So if I have a task and I complete my task, really what I've done is I've put that into another category, which is I'm waiting for a response or I'm waiting for someone to do something, and oftentimes those tasks come back around. So in almost every time management system, you'll see that task management and action item management is not necessarily a linear process. So we have to think about how to deal with the tasks that are really sort of in sandbox mode. They're off to the side in the parking lot, and then they're going to circle back and return to our lives. So those are the three big things that we see typically that all time management systems have in common. So there's really two ways of thinking about time and thinking about managing the time that you have. There's the top-down perspective and there's the bottom-up perspective, and I'll explain what I mean by both of those in just a second. But before I do, I want to say Both of these are important. So I'm about to talk about two different systems, and one is a top-down system and one is a bottom-up system. And then what I'm going to say to you in the course of that is you can't really pick. You kind of have to do both, but you need to understand when you're thinking about time management systems what this means. So, okay, what do I mean by this? Well, let's start with the top-down concept. So top-down time management systems start out with that long-term plan. And I had it in a couple of slides ago, the values at the top. So a top-down system has you sitting down and thinking about what your values are and what your goals are and how you want to get there, and then setting priorities and then rolling up the tasks underneath them. So a top-down solution is somewhere where you're really thinking way ahead. Where do I want to be, not tomorrow, not next week, not when this project is over, but where do I want to be in 3 years or in 5 years? And more importantly, what are the values? What's the value system that's driving the answer to that question? So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that I value lifelong learning. If lifelong learning is important to me and I always want to be continuously challenged and always learning new things, then I need to have some goals related to that. And if I value family time and relationships, then I need to have some goals that are related to that to make sure that I fit those in my schedule. If I value making huge quantities of money so that I can do whatever I want, well, then I need to have some goals that are related to that. So the top-down perspective is to first think about what are my goals? What are the things that I value? When I look back on my life in 5 years and in 10 years, what do I want to see as consistent messages that are going on in my life and my career? And then how do I deliberately plan for those things? And I'm going to go ahead and say that top-down planning is intimidating for a lot of people. So a lot of people think about time management because they're overwhelmed, because they have a lot going on. And so then when they're presented with a top-down system of thinking about where they want to be in 3 years or in 5 years, and they feel stuck or they feel uncomfortable where they are, it can be hard to look out and say, where do I want to be? That can be intimidating, or you may not know the answers to those questions, and that's okay. But it is important to understand that, again, if you don't know where you're trying to go, any road will take you there. If you don't have a sense of what your values and your goals are, it's going to be very hard to do the prioritization piece of any time management system. So I do encourage people, and one of the systems that's built around this is the Franklin Planner system, which if any of you learned years and years ago, as I did, this slide and the picture on the left will look very, very familiar to you. The Franklin Planner system starts off with an exercise of establishing your governing values and the things that matter to you, basically your core value system, from which everything that you do from a time management system flows. And of course, because we live in the corporate world, the Franklin Planner system was absorbed by Stephen Covey's company and became the Franklin Covey system, which is based on Stephen Covey's book, which is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you have not read this book, I strongly, strongly encourage it. It is a really wonderful perspective on how to think about not just time management, but really personal effectiveness management. And so both of these are organizationally very top-down systems. You need to know what your big rocks are, which means, and this is an analogy that I'm sure many of you have heard before, if you take a jar and you want to fill it up and you have a bunch of big rocks and you have some smaller rocks and then you have some sand and then you have some water, if you put the sand and the small rocks and the water in first, you cannot fit in the big rocks. But if you put the big rocks in first, then everything else fits in together and everything's fine. So the 7 habits concepts are designed around beginning with the end in mind. They're designed around this big rocks concept. And again, it's designed around this idea of having a value system and knowing what those critical important processes and endpoints are that you want to get to. And then the Franklin Planner system was a way to take that top-down value-driven conversation and then integrate it into your daily life. So every single one of your values then connected to a particular initiative or a project or a goal that you set for yourself. And then those goals were broken down into daily tasks, and that was what you put on your daily calendar. So this system, which is not a new system, it's been around for a very long time, is a very nice example of a top-down system. It's something that you can still go out and learn. So Stephen Covey certainly has seminars and trainings, and if you're interested in digging down deep in this, there's a lot of resources out there about it, and also a lot of tools that are out there about it. But again, it is a top-down system. So now I want to talk about the bottom-up concept. So bottom-up time management really starts at the starting point of your tasks. And this is very appealing to those of us and many people who are just completely overwhelmed and feel like they have so much on their plate and they're losing track of things. So typically, when people start getting into time management, they start from the bottom up. They say, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting to do things. I can't fit one more thing into my schedule. I just don't know how I'm going to manage my days. And the first thing that they try to get their head around is, what am I trying to do? What are all these things that are on my plate? And the first thing that you do when you're faced with that question is you start to write them down. You start to put together, whether it's electronically or whether it's on paper, that complete list of what it is that you're working on. And what's interesting is just by doing that, you can start to see some commonalities. You can start to see some buckets and some trends. So, gosh, if I look at where I spend my time, it does kind of tell me what my values are. So sometimes they're misaligned, and in fact, sometimes when you do a bottom-up time management assessment of yourself and you look at where you're spending your time, part of what you're unhappy with is that you're not spending your time on something that matters to you. So just as an example that I hear a lot, people who are overwhelmed, people who feel like they have too many things going on, talk about, gosh, I don't get to spend enough time with my family, or I don't get to go travel as much as I'd like to, or, you know, I'd really just love to sit down and read a book on a Tuesday afternoon. So there's a litany of things that are not getting done that are important, and then there's this whole list of things that are getting done, but it seems like the priority is off. So when you're looking at a bottom-up system, what you're doing is saying, what am I doing? Where is my time going? What am I spending my time on? And then you can take a look at that and say, okay, based on that, what do I want to change? And how am I going to change such that my priorities are more aligned with my goals, and then my goals are somehow more aligned with my long-term plan? So just to go back to the beginning of this conversation, I said to you, there are two different ways of looking at time, and while there are systems that are predicated on each of these two different ways, I think you owe it to yourself to do a little bit of both. So if, when you're thinking about time management, and you start to think about it at the highest levels, and you get a little stuck and say, you know, I'm not really sure what I want to say here, switch the other way and take a look at what you're doing and evaluate, do I feel comfortable and good and positive about where I'm spending my time, or what do I feel like I'm missing out on? What do I feel like I should be doing more of? Where do I feel like I should be spending more of my time? And that can drive the conversation into the direction of, okay, what should my long-term goals be? What should my values be? So the most common bottom-up time management system is David Allen's Getting Things Done system. And David Allen is really, in a lot of ways, the thought leader around bottom-up time management. And the most important thing that he talks about is getting things out of your head, getting all those things that are spinning around in 15 different places, whether it's in your head or it's on sticky notes or it's, you know, scattered all over your desk on little bits of paper or in your email. Get it all out of your head, get it all onto the paper, and then you can make decisions about what you're going to get done, in what order, in what way. But it removes this stress, this overwhelming stress that you carry around with you of, I know there's stuff I'm supposed to be doing and I don't know what it is. So on the left side of the slide, you see what's called the Eisenhower grid. And the Eisenhower grid is a time management strategy. So this is a second piece. It's not associated specifically with David Allen, but it is a second piece of a bottom-up time management system, which is looking at all those things that you get out of your head, all of those assorted tasks, and then rating them. And we're going to talk more about this in just a second, rating them by how important they are and by how urgent they are to figure out whether or not you should be doing them at all. So the bottom-up time management systems, just to recap, are the ones that start with tasks, and then you can see patterns in your tasks and start to understand where you're spending your time and how you want to change that. And top-down management systems are the ones that start with your goals and start with your values and then roll down from there so that you're making conscious choices about what rocks you're putting into that jar, what fits and what doesn't fit. So I want to talk now a little bit about prioritization. And this is, again, just another version of that Eisenhower grid that we were just looking at. And what you can see here is urgency and importance, first of all, are different. I want to come out and say that. And so what do I mean by that? Well, if something's really important, it's important because it ties to a value, it ties to a goal. Maybe it ties to one of your client's values or ties to one of your client's goals, but it is something that is necessary, that needs to get done. That doesn't mean it's urgent. That doesn't mean it has to get done today. And I think we see a lot of people confusing these two properties. So what does urgent mean? Urgent means we have a deadline. Urgent means something expires or something happens if we don't finish that particular thing today, that we lose some opportunity if we don't get that thing done. So urgency and importance together are something we have to consider. So if something is in quadrant 1, the lovely green quadrant 1 here, that means it is both urgent and important. Now, quadrant 1 is actually pretty easy to deal with. If you have tasks that are both urgent and important, it's pretty likely that you're going to get them done. So we don't have a lot of problem with what's in quadrant 1. And I'm going to talk a little more about it in a second, but actually everything ends up in quadrant 1 if you leave it long enough. And then as a secondary piece of that, everything actually ends up in quadrant 4 if you leave it long enough. And quadrant 4 is not at all urgent and not at all important. So if you let things go long enough, ultimately a lot of them stop being important just because you did not get them done. That doesn't mean it's a great thing, but that's what happens. But there are some things that start out in quadrant 4. They're not important, they're not urgent, they're just things that show up on your task list. They're things you should do. They're things that, somebody made you feel guilty about because, you should be exercising more, or you should be part of the parent-teacher organization, or you should do something. And if it's not urgent and it's not important, it's then something that you have to think about removing from your task list so that you don't end up spending your cycles on it, so that you don't end up spending time thinking about it. But again, quadrant 4 is not really a problem either. If something's not important and not urgent, it's really not going to be something you spend time on. The two quadrants that give people the most problems are quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. So let's dig into them a little bit. So quadrant 2, what's in that quadrant? Well, it's not urgent, but it is important. So not urgent and important, these are things like staying current, your long-term goals, your things that you're working towards, things that tie into your value system. But if you don't get them done today, that's okay. Nothing bad is going to happen, but you do need to get them done at some point. So things that are important and not urgent really need to be scheduled. One of the things that I hear a lot when I'm talking to people who are frustrated with what's happening in their work, their professional life, is that they never get things done that are in quadrant 2. They are always working in this state of busyness and having to get things done because there's all of this urgent stuff, and they don't have time to do the things they feel are very important but are not urgent. So my biggest recommendation for quadrant 2 is you need to block a certain amount of time. So let's say that you wanted to get your master's degree, or let's say you wanted to, I don't know, do something related to your health. So if you have things and goals which don't seem to be making it onto your daily task list, then take a look out a couple of weeks. And almost everybody, it's almost universal, that if you roll your calendar forward a couple of weeks, there's a lot of time. But if you look at today and tomorrow and next week, it's pretty booked up. So for stuff that's in quadrant 2, that is important, that's not urgent, I recommend that you go into your calendar, you look out a couple of weeks, and you set yourself a block of time, maybe 2 hours, maybe 4 hours, really depends a lot on what it is. And it may be something that you want to put on there as a recurring block. So I put on my calendar at least 1 day a week of do not book. And what do not book means is no meetings. No meetings. So I cannot have any meetings on one particular day of the week. And what that allows me to do is spend that day doing things, catching up, and getting stuff done that I feel is important but not necessarily urgent. So quadrant 2 is hard, but quadrant 2 is really about scheduling, and it's about making sure that you are putting time on your calendar and you are setting aside time to do that stuff that you know is important. The third quadrant is another one that gives people an awful lot of trouble. So what's in the third quadrant? It's stuff that's urgent but not important. So why would you have something that's urgent and not important? Well, let me just give you an example. Let's say that somebody else who you've been working with has missed a deadline and they have an urgent need. They need you to do something for them. But it's urgent because they missed something. They missed a deadline. So the urgency is not yours. The urgency belongs to them. And the task is not important in terms of what you're trying to do. It's not aligned with your goals. But someone is knocking on your door saying, can I have this, can I have this, can I have this? So things that are urgent but not important are, first of all, important to recognize, because there's a lot of false urgency out there. In fact, there are entire marketing departments that have as a goal to make things that are not important urgent as far as you're concerned. Quick, buy this, buy that, do this, hurry. So the first important thing for you to think about is, with any task, is this important? Is this aligned with my goals? Is this something that I should be spending time on? And if it's not, if it falls down into quadrant 3 or quadrant 4, then you need to take a look at the source of the urgency. Why is this suddenly urgent? Who is putting pressure on me to say this needs to get done? What is the thing that's causing me to need to do this? And then you need to make a decision. And sometimes your decision is going to be, and we'll talk about this a little later, your decision is going to be to say no. And no is an important word in your life when you're prioritizing. But for right now, what's important is awareness. You need to be aware of the fact that there are these things that are artificially urgent, and the quicker you identify them, the quicker you can get them off your list and move on to something that is important. So this is the core of prioritization. And prioritization, just to go back up a slide, prioritization combined with task management and the understanding of tasks is what allows you to manage your daily flow of what you're going to do. So now let's talk about tools. And I have just a few out here. There are actually hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tools that will allow you to prioritize, that will allow you to manage tasks, that will allow you to organize your stuff and keep it all together. So tools are great and tools are important, but actually the most important thing about tools is that you find what works for you. So here's what I use. And people are always surprised by this because I'm a technology person, and so they expect me to use all kinds of exciting tools, and you know I do. I'm happy to use tools, especially project management tools. If other people want to use them, I'm happy to participate. But at the end of the day, I use two things. I use Outlook for the calendar and for the email management. I use email as a task list in some cases, so I'm a big fan of zero inbox, and I don't keep a lot of stuff in my inbox. And then I use a handwritten to-do list. Now, why do I use a handwritten to-do list? I use it because if every day I sit down and write out the things that I plan to do that day, and then during the course of the day I cross those things off or I check those things off, then the next day I tear off that sheet and I start again, and I rewrite all the things that I didn't do the day before. And just the act of rewriting something every morning that you have not done 2 or 3 times really makes you feel like you want to get it off the list. So for me, this is my solution. Now again, it's not necessarily what's going to work for everyone, and so I really encourage you to think about how you like to work, what tools work for you, but don't neglect some of the basic tools and don't feel like you need to have a super complicated time management solution, because you don't. You just need to have what works for you. I also use calendars a lot, and I want to talk about a couple of key points about calendaring. So first of all, calendars versus lists. And the bunch of tools that I showed you a couple of slides ago, these tools, most of these tools are list-focused tools. So they will help you keep track of a list of things to do. But a calendar is really powerful because a calendar only has the time you have. So again, going all the way back to the fact that we don't have a time machine, if you have a calendar and you cannot find a place on your calendar to put a half an hour or an hour block of time to do something, then you shouldn't commit to being able to do it. So using a list to know what you need to do is important, but then using a calendar to know when you're going to do it and how you're going to fit it together like a jigsaw puzzle, and really being able to use that combined calendar view to say, am I doing the right things? Am I spending my time where I want to spend it? Is important. And it leads into the second bullet, reactive time versus proactive time. So on your calendar, reactive time is time when you're responding to emails, when you're responding to questions. Proactive time is when you're looking at what's on your list and saying, here's what I need to move myself forward. So having time, again, blocked off on your calendar to do those things is important. I'm a big fan of a unified calendar. That means my home calendar and my work calendar is the same calendar. That way I don't find myself overwriting some of the things that are important to my personal life. And I'm also a big, big fan of color coding so that I can easily look at my calendar and say, wow, I spent a ton of time this week on this project or on this particular thing, or wow, this week was all family time and that was pretty awesome, but now I need to spend some time back at the office. I also think it's important to have structured time and then to build in some space for free time, whether that's reading or whether that's walking or whether that's whatever it is that allows your mind to rest and to process. And then finally, just be consistent. So if you pop around to different systems, if you try a new different thing, it's a little like dieting. It doesn't get you anywhere. You don't make a lot of forward progress if you're bouncing around and trying all kinds of different things. I also want to talk about this tool, which some of you may be familiar with. It is important to be able to say no. And especially as a professional, an expert, it is too easy to spend a lot of time saying yes to people. A lot of us tend to be people pleasers. We want to say yes to people. But it is important when you think about your priorities and when you think about how you want to structure your time and your work to be able to know when to say no. That doesn't mean you should always say no. That doesn't mean you should be stomping around saying, I don't want to do anything. But you do need to be strategic about what you say yes to, and you need to be really comfortable saying no to things that don't fit in your priority list, that are not important according to your prioritization. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about work-life balance. So here's what we think work-life balance is supposed to feel like. It's supposed to be this Zen-like moment where everything is in perfect harmony. Well, it's not so much like that. So this is what work-life balance really feels like to me, and I wish I had a little GIF to show you the, spinning blender. But to me, work-life, especially when you're an independent professional, when you trade on your expertise, is oftentimes a blend. And it's something that you have to get comfortable with. It's why I am a big fan of this unified calendar concept, because it's not so much about breaking your week into 40 hours and thinking about the Monday to Friday the way a traditional work week works. It's about finding the times rooted in your values and your priorities to do the things that you're trying to do. So I really encourage you not to worry about trying to get to this Zen-like place where everything is just perfect, and just be comfortable with a blend, and that some weeks are going to look more like a strawberry banana smoothie and some weeks are going to look more like a kale smoothie, and that's all okay. You just need to get to the point where you have a blend that's comfortable for you and that you feel like your time is being spent on the things that are important. So what not to do? I want to talk about a couple of mistakes that people make. So mistake number one, this one is easy and obvious, no structure. So people who just sort of plow through life and who don't try to think about managing their time at all, this isn't really going to get you very far. The second mistake for a lot of independent professionals is to take on too much billable work. In other words, to say, well, gosh, I could make a whole lot of money if I booked myself out 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week. And that's just a recipe for burnout. So I don't recommend that at all. Mistake number three, no resources. So a big part of time management is knowing what you're good at and what you should be passing off to other people. So you can use the Eisenhower quadrant grid to figure that out too, to help you understand what's important to you, and then rate it by how confident you feel in doing that. So having resources will help you actually make more time. It's not quite a time machine, but it's close. Saying yes too much, which I already talked about, and then trying too many tools. Again, this is the dieting problem of, well, you know, today I'm on the Atkins diet and tomorrow I'm on the something else diet. The best thing that you can do is pick a tool and stick with it for a little while. Learn what you like about it and what you don't, and then adapt if you can. And ultimately, you'll get to a point of a tool set that works for you, and that's the end goal that you're looking for. So let's sum it up, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and I think we can have a good discussion in the last few minutes in the time that we have. So first of all, there's no time machines. There are just systems, and these systems are important for thinking about how you structure the time that you have. And there are two different perspectives on time management. There's the top-down perspective that starts with your values, the bottom-up perspective that starts with your tasks, and they are both important. Third of all, there is no right answer, so nobody can come to you and say, this is the only way to do time management. There are lots of ways that you can manage your time, and the important thing is to find what you like and what's comfortable and works for you. But sometimes the right answer is no. So you should feel totally comfortable saying no when you need to. And apps and tools are great. They're really wonderful, and there's tons of them out there, and we are actually spoiled for choice on options for how to manage our time. But that doesn't mean you should use 50 different tools. You should find the one that works for you. And then last but not least, there really is no work-life balance. It's all your life. So you just need to find the mix, the blend that is ideal for you and that gets you to your long-term goals and where you want to go. So that's it for today. I want to open it up for questions, and I'm just going to flip to the next slide so you have my contact information as well. And then I would love to hear what questions you have and see if I can answer some of them.
Great. Thank you very much, Katy. And Zintro members, feel free to reach out also to Katy directly. Please post your questions now using the questions section of your GoToWebinar platform. We'll keep the session open for another 10-15 minutes depending on how many questions we get. So let's jump right in. We have a question by David. He says it's more of a comment and asking for thoughts. So he says tasks which are important but not urgent are sometimes because they are major projects that have not been broken down properly, and so delivery date is still far off, but we don't move forward with it because it is set as this big project. We need to have regular milestones, but then it's really which do then become urgent too late in the game and we don't get to plan. So what are your thoughts on this breaking down projects aspect?
Yeah, that's a really great point, which is things that feel like they're not urgent, in a lot of cases feel like they're not urgent because the big deadline is not tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that the milestones and the progress that you need to be making is not urgent. So I do see a lot of procrastination, and I think it's very important not to wait until, as you said, too late in the game when it's really not a good situation, because then you don't have time to do the process correctly. So the earlier you can get in there and dig in and break down those big tasks into chunks, and I like to tell people, think about chunks in terms of an hour a day, or a half a day. Really, I never think about a chunk that's bigger than that. And if you can break down a big project into things you can do in an hour and then things you could do in half a day if you needed to dig down into it, then it becomes easier to get into that big project. So that's a really great point, being able to break down a big project into smaller milestones and then to recognize the timeline that you need to get those milestones completed.
Thank you very much, Katy. First of all, I would like, since we got a lot of messages about this point, I'd like to share with everyone that we will be sharing the recording of this presentation next week. You can go to blog.zintro.com/webinars. Check it out. You will get an email notification with our next newsletter. Also to check out the video and share it with others. A lot of people are asking how they can teach others about time management. A great way is to share this recording with them and reach out to Katy if you need any further assistance. Let me move forward with the next question. So Akbar says, thank you for this amazing presentation. I have a question for you. I'm a consultant and work on multiple projects and have a bad habit of checking my emails every minute. What advice do you have for people who are stuck on their phones checking their inbox every minute?
That is a great question. And first of all, congratulations to you for recognizing that that is a problem, because I see a lot of people who do not realize that that's a problem. So what I like to do with email is set out specific blocks of time during the day when I'm going to go through my email. And I said before, I'm a big fan of zero inbox, so I really do file every single email I receive unless I still have to do something related to it. So I set blocks of time, one first thing in the morning, one in the middle of the day, one to the end of the day. And during those times, I focus on email, and then I close it. I don't allow those notifications to pop up. I don't let notifications pop up on my phone because it does become incredibly distracting. And it's a little like sleep. You can't sleep in 15-minute increments. It doesn't help your body. And you can't do project work or deep, thoughtful work in 15-minute increments when in between getting distracted by emails. And it's not just emails. It's email, it's text, it's Skype, it's all the different ways that the world can interact with us. So you need to sort of push those things aside and give yourself blocks of time, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or a half a day, that you need to focus, and then set that expectation with people. Look, I check my email in the morning, I check my email in the middle of the day, I check my email at the end of the day. I think it's just important to remember that setting expectations for how and when you're going to respond to people is important, but then blocking off time specifically to do that email work and to respond to people is important too. So that's how I handle it, and that would be my recommendation.
Great. Thank you very much, Katy. So we have another question from Frank. Frank asks, how do I calculate the real time needed for a task to put it on my calendar? I'm always over-optimistic. I think actually he means the opposite. He says he usually multiplies by 3 whatever estimation he comes up with to allocate time. What are your thoughts about estimations?
So I think sometimes you can estimate really well if you've done something several times. So if it's something you do often, then task estimations tend to be pretty correct. But if it's not something you've done before, then yes, I recommend that you overcommit a little bit of time to determine how long it's going to take you rather than undercommitting. But I also recommend that you build some slots into your calendar that are essentially slush time. You block them off, you don't book things there, and that way you know if you can't complete something in the block of time you gave yourself, you can then push it over into that slush time block. So it's a little bit about not booking yourself back to back to back all day every day that allows you to have that extra time when you need it. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much, Katy. Frank, if you have any additional follow-up questions, feel free to drop them in. We have a question by Mary, very specific question. She says, I'm currently a consultant and in the process of starting a brick-and-mortar business in a completely new area. How should I effectively approach time management for both? Sure.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I think there's a lot to it. And I don't know that I can really answer the question here, but what I can say is it's again about focusing on your values and knowing what your goals are and then blocking off time that is what you think you need to balance those two things. So that is a tough challenge, and there's a lot of information out there on the internet, and I'd also be happy to make some recommendations if you want to reach out to me through my Zintro connection.
Well, thank you very much, Katy. We have a couple more questions, but we're running out of time. Guys, feel free to reach out to Katy at any point through her Zintro profile. It's really easy and completely free. Just as a reminder, we will be posting the recording of this presentation in the following week in blog.zintro.com/webinars. I just sent you that URL through message. And you will be getting an email when we send our next newsletter with the same URL so that you can find the webinar. Feel free to share it with anyone. I hope you found a lot of value. We really appreciate Katy's time. So Katy, on behalf of Zintro and our over 200,000 members, thank you so much for sharing your insights. This closes today's presentation. I wish you all a very nice day and thank you for attending.